as Rachel said, I've worked in similar contexts. I've taught ESL online and in person, from the most pre-literate to graduate level educational linguistics. And my favorite thing to do is to teach literacy level ESOL, those NRS levels 1 and 2. There are so many reasons why I love it. I love how strategic you have to be, how challenging it is, how fun and creative everyone involved is, all the knowledge that the learners are bringing to the table, and all the wonderful things you get to learn from them. I just think it's incredibly fulfilling and exciting, and I'm glad I get to be with other educators who hopefully feel the same way. Where I learned about teaching these learners was primarily at refugee resettlement agencies. I was often the only educator on staff, or just one of a very small number, providing resources to recently resettled refugees or refugees who were utilizing other services used by the agency. And a lot of them had limited or no contact with print and limited or no contact with spoken English. I had one student in one of my first classes when I was ever doing this, who, when I asked her what her name was, she repeated back, "What is your name?" And I said, "My name is Eliana." And she said, "My name is Eliana." And I thought, okay, we have a ways to go. And I had to get really creative. And what I'm going to share with you today is basically an information dump of a bunch of strategies that I've developed over all of these years of doing this, situated within a framework that I've developed for engaging online instruction for these learners. At the end of today, you'll be shared an interactive version of these slides with a lot more text, with links to tutorials, to samples from me, to a bunch more resources. So don't feel pressured to write everything down at the end of today. You will get everything for free online for as long as I can keep it up there. So the way that I categorize the practices that I've developed or learned from other people over the years is through these 3 buckets: prioritizing access, harnessing creative media, and leveraging physical space. And each of the practices that are listed here are practices that we're going to review today. And if you want to see them demonstrated in more detail, that is a great thing that we can do in the breakout room. I'll show you samples today, but it'll just be a little bit of a taste. So let's start with prioritizing access. So I found that a lot of, and I'm sure you found it too, a lot of materials that are created for these learners, even that are created for online learning, are not geared towards learners who are at this proficiency level in their, or at this point in their English language learning journey or their literacy journey. This could also be applied to ABE learners who are emerging readers as adults too, right? Those resources are not fit for them. So I was making pretty dramatic alterations to a lot of materials. And these are just some of the things that I did to try and remove barriers and increase comprehension for my students. The first is I have a minimal slides design process that I do. The first thing is I always have white text on a black background or black text on a white background for that high contrast. With occasionally, you can see here, I might use a bright color for emphasis, but other than that, we're keeping it very simple. The text is as big as I can possibly make it. If I ever had to go below like 18 points, I'm like, well, then that means it doesn't fit and we have to do this differently. That was my indicator. I really try not to go below 24, if I'm being honest with you. And you can see that I have things take up the whole page as often as I can. These are Google Slides, but there might be other materials that you teach with as well, but I'm using the entire space. And we can talk a little bit more about that later if you want. But even if your students are lucky enough to have devices like Chromebooks that are lent out, some agencies I worked at were able to provide that and some weren't, you still need to kind of accommodate how new a lot of these types of learning procedures are. So that's the beginning. But I also sometimes designed slides vertically. Most of my students were learning on phones, and even the action of like tilting their phone and having it rotate, it wasn't necessarily intuitive for them. It could be very stressful. It also changed the orientation of the controls within Zoom, which we were still learning. So I will share a tutorial on how to do this, but for some of my learners, Everything was in the shape of their phone so that when I screen shared during my Zoom meeting, it took up the entire phone screen rather than being this tiny little thing that they would have to navigate and zoom in and out of. Here you can see I'm asking how many children they have. We're working on what is your name, working on some basic vocabulary. So this is just some examples of what that might look like. I also really tried to select relevant visuals. I'm based in Philadelphia, and a lot of the refugees that I worked with were purposefully resettled in the city of Philadelphia because their children had extreme medical complications. And the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which is part of the University of Pennsylvania, is a leading hospital. So even if they didn't know the name of what it was, as soon as they saw this image, they were saying, "Oh, it's CHOP. Teacher, it's CHOP." And I said, "Yes." So picking things that they know, picking geographically relevant images, culturally relevant images. I've thrown in some diverse stock photo libraries here if you want to try and get stock photos that look like your learners, because we know a lot of stock photos don't look like our learners. Also, when I was talking about things that were relevant to their everyday, trying to think about the logos that they might interact with. So when we learned about bills, I made sure I put in the water department bill is going to have this logo on it. The electric bill is going to have this logo on it. So trying to make sure that you're orienting everything and keeping it socially relevant for your learners has helped me a lot. I also use an accessible typeface. That typeface is called Lexend. It is free and you can implement it in your Google Drive like that. It is designed for people who are struggling with reading proficiency, who might have visual impairment, visual degeneration, visual processing issues, but honestly, it helps me too. I try to use it all the time now. And I have a screenshot from their website. But if you don't like Lexend or you're not using Google Suite, there are so many accessible typefaces that are out there. This really helped some of my older students in particular who were struggling, and I could see that I was just looking at their nose every time because they wanted to get close to the text. I also use images with transparent backgrounds. It can be hard to see. It can be hard to see on a phone. It can be hard to know what I'm asking you to look at if there are a lot of different elements in an image. So when we're learning about how much change we need for the bus, what an ATM is, I want to make sure that it's clear what I'm asking and that there are no distractions and that it's accessible for learners who, again, might struggle with visual impairment or any sort of, vision-related challenges. And I have tools for that are free as well. And finally, in this category, I use icon-based instructions. I have to shout out Rachel Briggs. She gave me this idea years and years and years ago before she ever knew who I was. And I developed my own little icon library that described all of the different tasks we were going to do. I never wrote out my directions because we weren't going to read them anyway. And we reviewed these icons every single day as part of our opening routine of class. So we were learning all these basic verbs. Here, I want you to listen. Here, I want you to WhatsApp me. We were very religious WhatsApp users at the time. I wish we could have used Seesaw. And every slide, you saw here, they have these icons indicating, I want you to write this down. This is a new word. We're going to practice speaking this dialogue aloud. You can also see here, I didn't format it like a script because they wouldn't, they don't have a cultural frame of reference necessarily for that in English. So that is all of my accessibility focused interventions. I also recently learned about the Noun Project, which is an amazing stock photo library that's all images and it's all icons. So it's like an endless repository of any icon you could ever need. I try not to use too many because I'm teaching it to them and I want them to remember the words, but anything you could need is probably in there. The next thing that I do is I work to harness creative media. So this is a way that I keep my learners engaged and I keep the content relevant. I keep things interactive. Hopefully they're more memorable as well. So one example of that is vlogs and voice notes. If you have an iPhone like me, your phone came with a free app called Clips that can caption any video that you make automatically. There are similar apps for Android. They don't come on your phone, but you can download them. And I would make vlogs for my students that corresponded to the types of content we were learning in class. So for example, this is a vlog I made when we were talking about running errands and walking around the community. You'll see I went to some of their places that they definitely knew and places that were important for them to know. Okay, I'm at the hospital. Now I have to find my appointment. Hi, I'm Amin. I'm gonna be drawing your blood. Thank you. Okay, I finished my blood test, and now I am going to go to the library so I can return some of my books. Walking, walking, walking. Here's the library. It's one of my favorite places in the city. This is the library that is closest to my house. You get the picture. We don't have to watch the whole thing. This one's definitely too long. We didn't have access to an LMS at most of the places where I worked, so WhatsApp became my LMS because it's so great at saving all of these files, forwarding things to people. I know they forwarded things to people sometimes. I also use voice notes a lot. Sometimes I can even get interpreted voice notes depending on who's around me and how much I can get them to help. A lot of my learners, they wouldn't be able to send me a text, but they would say, "Teacher, I need the link." For example, if they need a Zoom link, and I would say, "Okay, it's coming." Or if they had questions, but also WhatsApp assignments were a really good way for me to extend learning, check their understanding. They could send me a voice note or a video about what they did over the weekend, if we were ready for that. So these are things that they largely already know how to use, not necessarily, but a lot of them are using WhatsApp. It's the most used communication app in the world. And a lot of them use voice notes anyway, because it's harder for them to communicate in other ways. So we made very frequent use of that tool since it was already in pretty frequent use anyway. Music is something that is used in teaching contexts around the world, but we don't always use it with adults in the United States. And it's too bad because it actually really, really helps. When I had that learner coming in saying, "My name is Eliana," repeating after me, I went back to the drawing board and I remembered a family literacy class I taught once and the song that this man would come in and sing to the children every day. So I made my friend teach me 3 chords on the ukulele and we sang this song at the start of every class and she got it like that. It was amazing. She finally understood I was asking her to respond and that we were playing a game. So we sang what it goes. Sorry, I'm not a musician. It goes like, "What is your name? My name is Eliana. What is your name?" Hmm. When people say, "What is your name?" that means they want to be your friend. And it seems like something that might feel babyish, but they loved it. I was so nervous to try it out. Another great thing about music is so related to culture. And if you have a lot of students who share culture, sometimes you can find English music that lives from their culture. So one of the first pre-literate classes I taught was specifically for Swahili-speaking refugees from Congo, specific. And so I was able to find Afrobeats English learning music. So we listened to this song so often.
Do you know the days of the week? Yeah. Okay, we're going to make it a song and sing it together. Are you ready? Yeah. Do you know the days of the week? 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 Let's go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I know the days of the week.
much longer than that. We didn't always watch the whole thing. It's a lot of iterations of clapping and dancing, but we watched that every day and they learned the days of the week. And they really, really enjoyed it. I highly recommend. I have some recommendations from, the resource that I'll send out after, but I'm really still actively looking for more. So if you have good recommendations for me in this, definitely send me an email because I want to know. I want to gather them. Another thing is class books. So I use a tool called Book Creator. It's free. There are similar tools out there. You can even use Google Slides for it. And I use it in two ways. The first way was in a responsive way. I had a student come in once and say, Eliana, I'm taking the permit test in 2 days and I don't know how to do the application. And I said, okay, how can I teach him this without derailing my entire class? So I wrote a book about Amira getting her driving permit. The students who were able to read with me were reading with me, some were listening, we were responding to the images. These are all stock images I was allowed to use. See, I used the PennDOT Driver's License Center, and then I used the real Pennsylvania driver's license application, and I put images in the book of all the different things we were learning how to do. What did she put here? What did she put here? Do you tell people your social security number? We work on that a lot because sometimes they'll text me things and I'll say, you shouldn't be texting people that. And this is one example, and then they can read it. I send it in a link afterwards. They can review it. There is an out loud speaking tool that will read to you if you're able to navigate to that. Luckily, we review icons a lot, so I think some of them did use this tool. Another way is utilizing the language experience approach. It's not just for in-person learning. For that class I was mentioning earlier, this is one of the first ones I ever made. We were finishing learning about food and about actions for creating a meal. And so I had them explain to me how they make their food. I recorded myself reading it for this one. So it was probably easier for them to locate that option. And, this is what I came up with. It's not perfect. They said, oh, teacher, that's not how my fish looks when it's done. But, we do our best with the resources that we have available. And they told me that they read these to their kids. And that's really what it was all about. So they get really invested when a piece of them is involved and when it's about something that they care about. We play a lot of games too. It can be hard with tools like Kahoot, for example, where, learners are going to have to be navigating between multiple devices and they might not have multiple devices, or the cognitive load of doing that might just be a little too great and might derail the class too much. But there's no reason you can't play as a group. It's a little more teacher directed, calling on people, asking them to do different things. Sarah mentioned word wall earlier. I'm a huge word wall fan. This is a bamboozle game. Oh, I thought I had the link, but I guess I don't. But you can imagine what it looks like. And I have some more examples that I guess I'm allowing cookies, that I link in my, oh wow, serendipitous. I clicked the right one. And we can answer this together. I can call on people. There's different ones. Bamboozle is free, but I think now there might be a limit to how many you can make. When I first started using this website, there was no limit, but these days, and sometimes I would just do things to make them laugh because I knew that they loved dogs that, they loved pugs. I don't know why, but I found this, so we use that one. I'm gonna make this not full screen though. So that's just another example of something that keeps people engaged, that's creative. There are a lot of games that already exist on sites like Bamboozle, Wordwall, Kahoot, Flippity. I love Flippity. But sometimes I'm more prone to make something myself just so I can guarantee there's nothing sneaky in there that we haven't talked about. The last thing I'm going to talk about with you today is leveraging our physical space. I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in what we can do digitally that we forget that we still have space around us that we can use and that our learners can use. And we get so fatigued on our screens, especially if online learning is new, it can be exhausting. So one thing that I would do is whenever we did role plays, I used virtual backgrounds to indicate what kind of role play we were doing. So even if they didn't fully understand, if I said, okay, you're the patient, I'm the doctor, they would say, you're not a doctor. And then I would put up the virtual background and they would go, oh, doctor, I'm sick, right? And there's a lot of different ways you can do this. You can put up a grocery store, you can put up a classroom if you want to feel more connected to that as well. There's a million different things, and there's so many virtual backgrounds that you can just find through Google, and it makes a big difference. It transports them somewhere new. I also bring a lot of realia into the classroom, whether that's a driver's license. I do bring my driver's license and we read my driver's license together and we use the ones from the government websites. I like to mini SEPTA bus. You can buy all these public transit items and show them and then use them to teach directions. Is the bus turning left? Is the bus turning right? And you can do that with a lot of different types of content with food. Go in your kitchen. I know a lot of us do that already, but sometimes we forget. And I also have signs that I hold up, unmute and mute signs if I want them to do it themselves. I have a whiteboard. Sometimes I'll hold that up. So these are physical cues that bring us back, especially because even though I have my minimal slides, I don't always want us to be looking at slides, especially if we're new to decoding text. That can be a lot, and they want to see my face. They want to see my expressions, my big ESL expressions. And if I'm a tiny little box in the corner, then they're not going to be able to get the most out of that. Two more things and then I'm done. I got a timer going, Rachel, don't worry. Total physical response is not just for in-person learning. This was shared with me by a colleague. This was his series of images. I adapted it to my vertical orientation. He would do this at the beginning of every pre-literate class, and then so did I. We would start every class, reach your arms up, stretch, touch your nose. And by the end of just a couple of weeks, my learners were finishing my cues for me. I would say, touch your, and they would say nose. So they didn't even realize they were learning. I was just saying, oh, it's too much computer. Let's stretch. But it's just another way to get yourself in the groove and to make sure things are really sinking in. And then the last thing is I use my phone as a document camera. I don't have a document camera, but I have a phone and I have a $2 locker shelf. So what I would do is I would join Zoom on my computer, and then I would join as a participant on my phone. I would spotlight my phone, rest it on the locker shelf, and write. Some of us have iPads. I use my iPad a lot when I'm teaching online, so I can draw with my Apple Pencil, but with learners who are just starting to write, the disembodied writing was very strange, and they didn't understand, how was I holding my pencil? How should they hold their pencil? I could draw pictures for them. I could be really responsive. So that's my final trick. And all of this is to say, not every strategy is going to work in every program, in every course, in every modality. But my hope is that, at least one thing I shared today is something you could adapt and utilize in your classroom or in your program.